Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name's Andy Sherritt. It's 2 o'clock, so it's our allotted start time. I'm just going to mute myself for another minute just to allow any late joiners. So I'll be back with you in literally 60 seconds. Thanks again. Okay, I'll make a start then. Thank you again for joining us. Hope everyone's having a good afternoon. My name's Andy Sherritt. I'm the Head of Business Development here at ITHealth, and I would also like to introduce my colleague from Sophos, Jonathan. Over to you, John.
Good afternoon. Yeah, nice to speak to everybody. So I deal with our public sector relations at Sophos, well, across the public sector, as we say there, from local government, NHS, MOD, police, etc.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. So yeah, just before we crack on with today's topic, the usual housekeeping points. We're recording the webinar. As always, we will send you a recording after the event, so don't feel the need to take any screen grabs or anything. You'll get a copy of this recording, and please do challenge us with any questions as we go through. I'll be monitoring the questions, and we can either answer during the presentation or at the end. So yeah, please do ask us some questions as you think of them. In terms of the webinar today and the topic, obviously it's all about how we can work with Sophos to help you mitigate the threats that you're facing, and do so hopefully in a way that's cost effective and without increasing your sort of administration workload. Conscious that you probably don't know who ITHealth are unless you've got a background within NHS IT, because we've actually been focused on healthcare IT security for the last 30 years or so. So before I hand over to Jonathan to do this sort of cyber threat presentation, I'm just going to very briefly introduce you to ITHealth and what we do. So Jonathan, you've got control. Next slide, please. So yes, we provide organizations with proven and trusted IT security and access management solutions. In terms of kind of what that looks like, Jonathan, on to the next one, please. So we've got kind of areas of our portfolio that dip into these main areas. So secure remote working, you know, helping with mobile and home working, which is obviously quite topical at the moment. The end user protection and network defense piece, that's predominantly Sophos, which we'll see today. But we also have quite a bit of expertise around compliance, governance and assurance. Underneath those kind of technology areas, we've obviously got our kind of services arm. So that's really where we kind of make a difference, I think. So around design, support, installation, you know, we've got a really strong group of engineers, second to none really, certainly from a point of view of Sophos expertise. Next slide, please, John. And yeah, to touch on the sort of compliance side of things, you may well have seen, and you may well have also registered for next week's webinar, which is all around our assurance dashboard, which is designed to sort of provide real-time view of your compliance and where the risks are across your estate. So if you're not already registered, please do join us. That should be another interesting session. Next slide, please. And yeah, just so that you can see who the vendors are that kind of underpin those solutions. Hopefully a lot of those will be familiar to you. I'm not going to go through them all, but those are kind of the companies that we're working with predominantly at the moment. Next slide, please, John. And yes, we are a long-standing partner with Sophos. We've had a really nice relationship with them over a long period of time. So as I say, like to think that if you are looking at Sophos, whether it's a full consolidation project or just at some of their point solutions, ITHealth should be a reliable partner for you to work with on all of that. Next one, John. And yeah, those are our details. So yeah, without further ado, I'll hand you over to Jonathan for today's presentation. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Andy. So afternoon, everybody. So as you know, the title of today's presentation is Mitigating Cyber Threats Faced by Local Government. And these threats are not just faced by local government, they're faced by all public sector organisations and in fact commercial organisations, but we'll very much focus in on what it means to you as a local authority working in today's public sector. So Andy's already introduced me. So I mentioned earlier on, my role is kind of twofold. So I run a team of account managers who work with you, our customers, but I also am responsible for Sophos' sort of public profile across the public sector. So we have a lot of engagement with stakeholders, the LGA, across other different bodies as well. And if you want to find me on LinkedIn and connect afterwards, you can do so there. So first and foremost, before we get into the kind of meat and bones of the presentation, just a bit of an introduction to Sophos for those of you that might not be aware of kind of who we do, what our credentials are. So we've been in the IT security market, the cyber security market, for over 30 years now. We were started in Abingdon, which is near Oxford. So we're a British company. And throughout that time, we've always believed that simple security is better security. And by simple security, I mean security that's very easy to manage, and so you can't misconfigure it, and that leads to better results in terms of your security posture. And that's not changed throughout that 30-year period. The products that we provide allow you to secure every endpoint of your network, whether that's a mobile, laptop, desktop, server, etc. And we aim to keep you secure, obviously, especially as threats grow in today's world. We see 400,000 plus new threats every single day. So our job is to keep you secure in that environment. And the strategy that we've got has been very much validated by Gartner, with Sophos being a leader in the Magic Quadrant to both the endpoint and UTM. So we've got real credibility at both ends of the spectrum as we start to talk about protection right through from the gateway right to the mobile device that I mentioned a minute ago. So that's Sophos. I mean, in terms of the drivers, the things we can help you with within the local authorities, obviously we've got various different compliance drivers that we're working with you on. So first and foremost, PSN, but also Cyber Essentials Plus. So everything that we do is designed to try and help you maintain compliance with those different accreditations, but also keep you, your citizens, your services safe, secure, and your services up and running. So that's what we're talking about. So what are the threats faced by the public sector today, and in particular, obviously, local authorities, but we will touch on some other non-local authority examples because I think they're relevant. Well, before we do that, let's have a think about the impact of some of these things. I saw a video recently on the BBC News website which talked about the fact that what happens in the cyber world is increasingly impacting us physically. So the things that we can or can't do, based off the back of the fact that some services have been taken offline through cyber attacks. And we'll touch on one in a minute with the Hackney Council, which is going on at the moment, and we'll talk about the implications of that. But you're all probably aware of the Redcar and Cleveland cyber attack earlier on in the year. I mean, the cost of that, let alone the disruption to the services that the council suffered, it was estimated to be above £10.4 million, and that's still rising at the moment. So that's £10.4 million of taxpayers' money that's had to go into remediation around that attack. And obviously it caused a lot of disruption to the population and to the council themselves in terms of the services that they provide. So these attacks are really serious. And what we're starting to see is, excuse me, especially ransomware becoming more targeted at individual organisations. Often, I'm not saying this is the case in this one, but often what happens is an attacker will get inside your network and kind of move laterally to then basically go wholesale and have an attack on your network. So having really good sensors on your network to make sure that you're aware of what's going on, make sure that someone's not lying dormant inside your network, can really help you, in terms of mitigating the risk from these threats. And I guess a bit of investment up front means that hopefully you're not going to be the next victim of something like this. So Redcar and Cleveland was earlier on in the year, but the recent one that we've seen is London Borough of Hackney, which you may or may not be aware of. So this was a screen dump of their website just earlier on today, a couple of hours ago. So you see right up front, they're talking about the fact that a cyber attack has hit them and that they're experiencing significant disruption off the back of it. So I mentioned about impacts having, like a real world impact on what people can do today. So I looked at what they were saying on their website, the kind of things that they're obviously suffering from off the back of this cyber attack. So they've been able to unable to accept some forms of payment, so rent, service charges, those kind of things. So obviously it's affecting their income. It's affecting their ability to get council tax payments from people. So some of them might be delayed, some of them might not be able to be processed at all. So again, their revenue streams are being hit. But at the same time, they're unable to make payments to social care. So you can see all these kind of things that are joining together to produce not just disruption for the council from an operational point of view, but also for citizens within that London borough. And, you know, I'm not going to read through everything there, but even things like planning, for example, could be really disruptive. You know, most planning services are unavailable. And so people aren't being able to do searches. It's impacting people's abilities to move house, etc. So yes, you know, reputational damage is a problem for local authorities that get hit, but also it's the citizens that suffer from not being able to do what they need to be able to do to live their normal lives. The local authorities aren't in isolation. I mentioned earlier on, we're seeing a real growth in the number of attacks that are having large-scale impacts on public sector organisations across the UK. You might be aware that universities are particularly being targeted at the moment, and we saw a very large cyber attack against Newcastle University a month or two ago, just as students were about to go back. And in fact, the NCSC, the National Cyber Security Centre, has even issued an alert to the academic sector following a spate of online attacks against schools, colleges and universities. We've also seen, for example, in the healthcare sector, a real growth in the US with ransomware being targeted against them. But again, these things aren't necessarily being targeted at a specific sector, it's just where the easy targets are. So we've all got to be very vigilant, and we'll talk in a minute about what you can do to remain vigilant and to remain secure, not just with Sophos products, but best practice as well. And what we're seeing is some of this is sort of being done by state-backed actors. So in this case, Chinese hackers looking for COVID-19 research data, but some of it can be what we call proxy state actors too. So people that are being paid to do stuff on behalf of nation states. And again, we'll touch on that in a minute when we come to what the National Cyber Security Centre are saying. I mentioned health. You know, social care is obviously part of the remit of councils, and also health promotion as well in terms of remaining well. So these things are joined up, but we're starting to see, you know, life and death things happening now within the public sector. We had the first example of ransomware actually causing, really unfortunately, a fatality in Germany a few weeks ago, where a hospital was closed after a ransomware attack, and the ambulance was diverted to one nearby, and unfortunately the patient died. And the German authorities are now looking to try and find the perpetrator and charge them with murder. So you can see how serious this kind of thing's coming. And it's not just those either. We've seen attacks on Parliament in the last few years, so where there were attempted blackmail attempts on MPs based on getting access to their email. And even the police have been targeted as well. We had the Police Federation that got impacted at 1.2. So you can see councils aren't existing in isolation. It's not just about Redcar and Cleveland and the London Borough of Hackney. It's happening all across the public sector. And the kind of things that we'll talk about are really relevant for any of those sectors. I mentioned hostile states. We've even seen the Australian Parliament being attacked. Probably saw that recently, and this has been going on around the world for some time now. You will see more attribution happening from the National Cyber Security Centre in our country. So they'll try and tell you who's behind some of these attacks. So, for example, the WannaCry attack in 2017 was blamed on the North Koreans. But attribution can be difficult, and sometimes it's possibly not in the nation's interest to divulge who is behind some of these attacks. But very much critical national infrastructure and local authorities are being targeted because of the disruption that can be caused, and people are trying to obviously extort ransoms out of you and your colleagues across the public sector. So what are the areas that need to be considered then when looking at how you can produce sort of a very mature cyber model to protect yourself against some of these things so you can avoid being the next authority that's going to be hit? Well, first and foremost, to say good cyber hygiene is really important. A lot of attacks that we see can actually be thwarted through good cyber hygiene, and through that I mean making sure that you've adhered to best practice. We'll talk about that in a minute. You've patched, you know, patch early, patch often is something else we advocate. You know, cyber hygiene is really, really, really important. And as I say, best practice really does lay the foundation for defence. So from a Sophos point of view, for example, I talked about ease of use, and again, something we'll come to in a minute, but we have a little toggle in our console which just says, do you want to adhere to best practice to make sure you're best protected? And that means you follow all of our defaults and that you can then be very well secured against the latest threats. Things like that are really key when protecting against the threats that are out there. The next thing I'd say is build cybersecurity in from the outset. So especially through the COVID pandemic, we've seen lots of services being spun up in the cloud, to, I guess, support home working, etc. But a lot of these have been done at such speed that maybe cybersecurity has not been baked in the way that it might otherwise have been. So one of the things I do is urge you to look at building that in the future. So when you conceive of a project, you say, well, how am I going to secure this whilst giving users access to really useful services, or it might be service users, citizens, etc. But I'd also urge you to go back and have a look at what you've already created, what you've spun up in the cloud, and how you can then go about securing that. So something to bear in mind. Next thing is defense in depth. So by defense in depth, I mean having a comprehensive strategy as advocated by the National Cybersecurity Centre. And they talk about having a layered approach to security that increases the security of the system as a whole. So we're talking about having layers of not just proactive, but also detective security. So you can try and prevent a threat coming into your network, but also detect if something is lying dormant in that environment. So what I mean by that is, you can have all the sort of machine behavioral protection, old-fashioned intelligence known to man, but there might be something that slipped through, or somebody might get onto your network. So then we're looking at things like endpoint detection response, so forensics effectively, to work out what's on your network, and if you've got another instance of a file, giving you the ability to go and actually close that file down and delete it. And then you can take that one stage further, and you can then buy in expertise from the likes of our managed threat response service, where we've got people that are doing that job for you. So layers are about people, process, but also technology as well, and making sure that you've got the proactive and detective security there. I mentioned patch management. I think through thinking in regard to patch management, we'd very much talk about patching early and patching often. For those of you that are around in the cybersecurity world in 2017, you'll recognise the screenshot there, the famous WannaCry, which caused chaos across much of the UK economy, especially hit the NHS, obviously. But that could have been stopped via having the relevant patch in place. That relevant patch would have stopped that threat from running. Now, if you weren't able to patch that, Sophos' Intercept X tool, so that's our next generation endpoint technology, which has exploit prevention built into it, would also have stopped that threat. So that's looking for exploits, in this case it was Eternal Blue, being used to then infect your network. So I'd say there's two areas around that kind of vulnerability protection. One is making sure that you are rolling out those patches to endpoints and servers, but also you need to deploy an exploit prevention tool such as Sophos' Intercept X. The next area is that of least privilege. Sorry, just go back one there. The least privilege. So this is about not giving access to systems, or not giving people admin rights to services that they don't need. You don't need to be logged in as an administrator at any time, all the time. Cyber criminals often try and infiltrate your network and try and grab those administrator rights to try and then move around your network. So being able to look at things like privilege access management, not something that Sophos provides. I know ITHealth can help you there, but you can be more secure through doing things like that as well. So I'd ask you to think about that as part of your cybersecurity strategy. I mentioned protecting the public cloud. So as I said, lots of things have been spun up into Azure, AWS, etc. as part of, well, certainly as part of the cloud first strategy from the government, but also as we've looked at the COVID pandemic. But really, we need to remember that there's a shared responsibility model when it comes to managing your assets and your services in the cloud. We need to make sure that we're treating the cloud like it was our data center in days gone by. So you need to realize that the cloud providers don't provide all the protection that you need, and so you need to protect your environment via the likes of firewalls that you can have in there, via server protection, etc. And then looking at things like a cloud visibility platform. So Sophos produces something called Cloud Optics, and it allows you to look across your multi-cloud environment to see where you might have issues, where a hacker might try and get into your cloud instances to try and then get back inside your network or to steal your data. So having visibility of what's there, what controls you've got, making sure you're following best practice, again, from a public cloud perspective, can really help to make you more secure. Because the benefits of cloud computing, we all know, there's some fantastic things that you can get out of that. But yeah, let's not forget that if this was on premise, then we would have secured it in the same way over the years. We just need to be aware that we need to continue to push cloud security. The other thing that's really, really important is looking at where threats come from. So we still see the vast majority of threats that come in and try and get onto your network through phishing attacks. So I would really advocate education is really important, not just from the point of view of educating your administrators in terms of how products can best be used, but also your users. So one of the tools that Sophos has here is something called Phish Threat. And Phish Threat is a tool which allows you to simulate a phishing attack on your network, and you can choose whichever users you want to aim it at, and you can do it on a rolling basis. And you can see who's susceptible to a phishing attack. And if someone clicks on something and then gives you an education program to sort of tell them why they should have been suspicious of that attack, why they shouldn't have entered their credentials, clicked on a link, be it whatever it is, and then it helps to then teach them about how they can watch out for these things in future. And over time, you can see the progress of each individual member of staff and work out how their kind of maturity in terms of understanding the risk they pose to the organisation improves. So I'd really urge you to think about education. The NCSC, the National Cybersecurity Centre, also do a board toolkit as well around cybersecurity. And again, that's something if you're struggling from a board perspective in terms of getting their attention around cyber, that's something that's really good and free of charge that you can find on their website as well. Next thing I'd advocate is testing your defences regularly. So we talked about following best practice. Best practice obviously changes over a period of time and threats change. So I'd urge you to constantly be on the lookout for holes in your defences. So get third parties to test those through penetration testing, etc. I think it's really good to keep going around this cycle of looking at how you could be better protected and are you up to date with mitigations against the latest threats. The other thing I mentioned, and this is very much where Sophos excels, is the matter of simplicity versus complexity of security. So throughout the time that I've worked at Sophos, which is an awful long time now, Sophos has always had the same mantra, which is keep it simple to configure, and then that helps you to avoid risk through mismanagement of consoles. So some of our competitors make you jump through lots of hoops. You've got 5, 6, 7 consoles to manage, which really brings complexity into play when you don't know if a threat's going to fall between the cracks of different types of protection, even from the same vendor. So this is where Sophos really believes simplicity is the key to all of this. And we'll show you later on something called Sophos Central, which is our single dashboard, which gives you one version of the truth, one view to see the status of your network. It's not just us saying this, though. Again, I keep mentioning the National Cybersecurity Centre. They mentioned that always, and in this blog post here, that poor usability often equals poor security. If something's really difficult to manage, if you've got multiple consoles, and as most local authorities have, not many people trying to manage all of these tools, often that can lead to misconfiguration or lack of ability to keep up to date with the latest threats. So having something that is very, very easy to manage and easy to keep up to date means that you've got more peace of mind and you can sleep more easily at night. So think about usability when you're looking at what solutions you're going to deploy. And all of that, it's the whole thing of complexity is the enemy of security. Any complexity you bring into anything causes an additional risk. And I've said here to a cybersecurity ecosystem, and I mean that in the broadest sense, in all the different tools that you have that don't talk together at the moment. We'll talk about how you can join these together in a minute. But complexity really is one of the risk factors when you look at security and things working in silos from each other. The other thing I'd think about is protecting servers. So servers are really the high value targets on your network. So that's where your data is. So it's really your crown jewels. And that's what the ransomware attackers, the hackers, are looking to get at, to get that high value data that they can hold you to ransom for. And we've also started to see people posting data online now to try and sort of, I guess, up the ante and up the value of the ransom payment requests. So it's really important that you keep your data secure through looking at things like server lockdown, so making sure that people can't make changes to your servers unless they are who they say they are. So not just if they've got admin rights, but also putting a password around server configuration, for example, because we know that servers are the perfect staging ground for an attack inside your network. A bit like I mentioned at the cloud. Again, it's kind of getting a foothold into your organization to then move around for further attacks. So think about your servers separately from your desktops and make sure you've got a best of breed server protection policies, such as Sophos' Intercept X for servers on those machines. So in summary, from a threat point of view, the threat that we're seeing is evolving rather than changing rapidly. So ransomware isn't yesterday's problem, but it's evolved more into something that they call big game phishing or big game hunting from the ransomware writers. They're trying to get into individual organizations and then try and extort them for very large sums of money and bringing down services, as we've seen with some of the incidents that I mentioned earlier. And it's both targeted and non-targeted. So we talked about WannaCry earlier on. WannaCry wasn't targeted at the NHS, but the NHS was the perfect place to be hit because their patching wasn't up to speed and a lot of them hadn't deployed the latest levels of protection. So people do get caught in the crossfire, but other people are being targeted specifically. And again, back to some of those examples that I talked about earlier. A lot of this can be countered via better cyber hygiene, so doing the basics right, and also by educating your users on things like phishing. So, phishing is still the most prevalent intrusion method that we're seeing across all sectors, not just local authorities. And sectors that have big data pools. So we talked about universities being targets, but local authorities also, you obviously have very big data pools about your citizens in your area as well. And think about all the valuable data that you've got on social care, etc. You're a real target for cyber criminals who want to again try and hold you to ransom for that data. We remain a significant threat due to having lots of data and intellectual property. I mentioned things like the COVID pandemic and the vaccine information that we've got in research at the moment. We're seeing universities and research being hit quite hard, or certainly trying to be hit by foreign state actors. And although there's been no category 1 incident, i.e. the very top level incident, WannaCry came very close, the NCSC are clear that it's a question of when, not if, that actually happens. So from a local authority point of view, as we become more connected and we look at things like connected regions and smart cities, those kind of things, obviously it's really important that we keep you secure by doing some of those basics, but then deploying the right tools as well. So from a Sophos perspective, we believe it's time to move to the next phase of consolidation. So we've had the first phase of consolidation, which is fewer vendors, better price points. As I'm sure you're all aware, buying more from the same vendor, often you can get a better price. But it's now time to look at products working together and having automation behind some of this. So Sophos can provide tools for all of these different areas: firewall, endpoint, server, mobile, email, wireless, encryption, and web filtering, everything that's there. But really the power of Sophos comes in the way that these things work together. So we talk at Sophos about a systematic approach to security. So, obviously a system is a set of things that work together as part of a mechanism or an interconnecting network. We see this in everyday life. So for example, I moved home not too long ago and I had a requirement for some of these things. So I needed to know who was at my front door. I wanted to keep an eye on who was knocking around outside. I needed to control my heating. I needed to know if I had a gas leak, carbon monoxide or whatever, if there was a fire, but I also wanted security things put in there as well. So switch my lights on and off at dawn and dusk to make it look like someone was in the house. So I could have gone down the line of answering this with all of these different products here, none of which were aware of what each other were doing, or I could have done what I did do and then look at this as part of an ecosystem, something that was very easy to use. So in my case, I went down the Google Home route with Nest products. So, my doorbell knows who's at the door. It can use artificial intelligence to tell you who that is. If my smoke detector knows that there's a fire or there's smoke or certainly carbon monoxide, it can tell my thermostat to switch my boiler off. My Google Home can also give me one pane of glass to show me who's at the door. It can give me all of those controls in one console. you get the idea. All of these things work together. So in our home lives, we're doing that. But from a security perspective, a lot of people haven't been doing that up until now. And it's important that we do that, because we talked about how attacks work. So often what we see is an initial attack that will come in through a phishing email, for example, or a malicious URL, which will aim to then do things like steal those credentials. So it's back to that privilege escalation management thing. Try and steal those credentials, but then obviously with the ultimate goal of encrypting your data, stealing your data, holding you to ransom through a ransomware attack, and getting access to your servers. So you'll notice that these things happen at different points of the network. So if you were to have a firewall that's not aware of what's going on at your endpoint, that's not really very useful in terms of the sensors that I talked about earlier on, how things flag up across your network. So this is where synchronized security from Sophos comes in. So this is the ecosystem that we have that enables all of our products to talk together, and it really transforms the way that you protect your local authority. So I talked before about the value of that single console, in the same way that we've got the Google Home Hub, which tells me, who's at the front door, tells me the heating in the house, tells me that everything's working really well. This is what Sophos Central gives you from a security point of view. So it's one management console hosted in the cloud, so managed for you, which gives you one source of the truth. And it's a really powerful thing to have. The other thing we need to think about, though, is not just sort of in-out traffic, so north-south traffic. We also need to think about east-west. So represented here, for those of you that recognize it, through the Wicked Witch of the East and West from the Wizard of Oz. It's still that thing, if I'm going out to a partner organization or going to my data center inside my environment, I need to make sure that that traffic is also secure. So again, it's something else that we need to think about, and Sophos Central and Sophos Solutions can help you with that, with synchronized security. The Sophos Central is this single management dashboard that allows you to see everything that's going on from a Sophos perspective across that ecosystem. So I've mentioned Intercept X several times today. So that's our next generation endpoint technology, which has anti-ransomware built in. If you have a ransomware attack, it can roll back the files and enable you to carry on working. It's also got exploit prevention as part of that, but also enables you to manage things like BitLocker encryption on the device and see the status of that. Enables you to manage a person's mobile, so remote lock, remote wipe, and security scanning, those kind of things, but also your server protection. It enables you to see into the cloud. I mentioned cloud optics earlier on, but also manage your firewalls as well. So I mentioned that synchronized security is about sort of end-to-end security. So Sophos has a range of firewalls called the XG firewall, which can identify traffic that's going in and out of your network, even if it's not got a signature based on the type of traffic. It can query your endpoint to see what type of traffic that is. So again, it gives you real great visibility into what's going on your network. At the same time as well, if a machine becomes compromised on your network, we have like a traffic light status saying, right, okay, my machine's either green if it's good to go, amber if it's got something suspicious on it, or red if we know it's been infected. And the endpoint can talk to the gateway to block access to the internet until that threat's resolved. So the automation as part of this is really key. So again, we know that there aren't that many of you as a number of you as administrators to your users compared to, say, an investment bank. This is really therefore important that we can automate as much of this process as possible. We talked about WannaCry there, that kicked off on a Friday. So those people that had this kind of technology were really in a good place. We had some people on lunch breaks and they got back from lunch and just found out that this had all defended itself, for example. So, it's a really powerful thing to do if you can automate some of this. Last but not least, I also mentioned the phishing simulation tool. We've got Fish Threat. Again, all of this is managed through Sophos Central and also fits together with our email solution, Sophos Email, which enables you to put extra security around Office 365 deployments. So again, you've got things like a continuity mailbox if you lose access to the cloud. It enables you to have like a sandbox for threats that are trying to come in through email. So very fully featured, all managed through the Sophos Central platform. What's more, we also have lots of intelligence built in. So one of the things that solutions often lack is the visibility into what's going on across your network. So we have our endpoint detection and response technology, which enables you to see what's on the network, why it's suspicious, and you can find files that are on other machines. But we now also have something called managed threat response, which I mentioned at the beginning, which is where we have a team of people that are watching out for threats on your network, and they can take action on your behalf if you so choose to let them do that. And also they can do things like threat hunting on your behalf. So we know cybersecurity skills are in short supply across the industry. So why not use one of our people to help you to stay more secure? So obviously that's from my perspective, but don't just take our word for it. We've also got numerous case studies, and as part of the follow-up to this, ITHealth will send you a case study from Tendering Council, who are using a lot of the technologies that we talked about in this presentation, and they'll talk about how we've helped with their digital transformation project as they look to try and move more services online. So that's the end of the presentation for now. I hope you found that useful in terms of looking at the threats that are out there, some of the sort of best practice, free of charge things really that you can do, then also how Sophos helps you to protect against those threats and mitigate the risks. So that's the end for me at the moment. So Andy, over to you. I don't know if we've had any questions.
There was just one question, Jonathan. It was around the synchronized security piece. It was basically asking if you needed to have an XG for that, and did that mean that they need to replace their existing firewalls?
That's a really good question. So yes, you would need an XG firewall. However, you don't need to replace your existing firewall. So we often have that question. So if you've got a firewall that you're really happy with, we can use the XG sitting behind that, and you can use it just as what we call like a heartbeat controller. So I mentioned that traffic light system that you've got on the machines themselves. So if you see a red status threat, you can just use that XG firewall to block outbound access, for example. So there's a variety of ways that you can choose to use the XG. It can be a primary firewall, but it can also be used as this kind of heartbeat box, or it can also add another layer of scanning if you really wanted to as well below your existing firewall. So hopefully that answers your question. We're flexible. It can be run in line with other firewalls as well.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. There's no more questions in the chat box. I'm happy. I'll just briefly unmute anyone just in case that encourages any other questions. I'm going to unmute the participants now. Guys, feel free to ask anything if you've got anything. I'm not actually sure that worked. Apologies. I thought I'd mastered the technology, but no, if there are any other questions, you can fire them through in the chat box, which is there now. Equally, we do ask, as soon as we wrap up the webinar, you'll be served a very, very quick survey. So please do give us your answers to that. It's really important that we get your feedback. As I said earlier, we'll follow up with a recording of this session, and you can also use that email to respond back with any specific queries, meeting requests, pricing and stuff like that. But for now, I think that's all we've got to tell you about. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Jonathan, and we'll hopefully see you soon. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.